Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with my October wrap-up. I am actually going to be able to get all of the books into one wrap-up instead of having to split it up, because I unfortunately did not read as many of my middle grade magic picks as I wanted to, which, you know, I'm sad about. Like, work just ended up being unexpectedly intense for the last couple of weeks, and I just didn't end up having as much time as I hoped I would. But thank you so much to everybody who participated, whether you read the group book with us, or whether you followed any of the prompts, or whether you just read like a single middle grade book. All of that is great, and we really love having you guys participate. So I will list content warnings in the description box and link all of the people and videos I mention. And although I didn't have a lot of quantity for middle grade magic specifically, quality was pretty good. So the first book I finished in October was Nick Blake and the Remarkables by Angie Thomas. This is the first book in a fantasy series. Angie Thomas, of course, is really well known for her hard-hitting YA contemporaries, and this is her new middle grade fantasy series. And this is one of the ones. There's a couple of books actually on this list that I wasn't necessarily planning to read this month, but I was kind of starting to plan for some future video things, and this is one of the ones that I got to for that reason. And so, like, I didn't intend for this to be my first book by Angie Thomas, but that's what ended up happening. And I enjoyed it, but I think I'm gonna, like, I'm sure I'm gonna love her contemporaries even more. So we are following our main character. I just had to check the name. It's like literally on the cover in the title. I feel like I always do that. Anyway, Nick Blake is our main character, and she and her dad they've always been really close, but they've had to move around a lot, and she ends up finding out some things about why that is and about her family that really upset her, make her feel really betrayed that her father has been keeping things from her. And so she's really angry at him, but then he ends up getting into some trouble and some danger, and so she has to go with her best friend and a couple of other people they meet to maybe try and rescue him. And there also is a big prophecy element, of course, the Manifestor Prophecy, and our characters end up learning more about that throughout the story as well. And Nick is one of the Remarkables, her and her dad are, which means they have abilities that are kind of like magic or like superpowers, and Nick is just starting to be old enough to like come into those powers. One thing I like about this book is that like, Nick already knows that she has these magic abilities, so that isn't like the conflict or the main plot, so I kind of like that. I really loved the like family relationships and how complex those were. I really loved some of the friendships. Her best friend, actually, in particular, like Nick's best friend JP is so funny. I really enjoyed him. I liked Nick as well. Just like the characters in general, I thought were really well written. And I also really liked some of the themes, or some of the kind of like underlying touches almost. Like, I really love the way that Nick, as she's learning more about this world of the Remarkables, which is, you know, the people who have these abilities, they have the gift, that as she's learning more about it, she is really bothered by the sort of non-interference policy with the human world. Like, she's really not okay with the fact that people who have these magical abilities, they have the ability to help people, and that they don't, because the sort of like magical government has decided that interfering is too messy or too dangerous. So I really like that that is criticized. I also really like that the way that like JP ends up being involved in this. It's like, I don't want to give too much away, but I really enjoyed the way that he was able to like actively contribute to the story without kind of giving him powers in the same way that other characters do. But I think one of the main things that kept me from really loving this is I just wasn't engaged in the plot. Like, I obviously cared about Nick being able to, you know, get her dad back, and like I was invested in the characters, like things turning out well for them, but like the whole plot structure just really didn't engage me at all with this book. It didn't like hold my interest the way that I wanted it to. And also there were some specific things about the ending that like I'm not surprised at, but I just found them very frustrating, and I don't know, it's kind of a development that I don't think is as interesting as other directions to go. And I also should mention that specifically these kinds of magical abilities and the gift is for Black characters. And I really like, well, one of the other kind of underlying elements that Angie Thomas works in. I really like that she specifically says in the story, and like shows in the story, that that magical ability had absolutely nothing to do with slavery. In fact, it was the opposite. It was something that Black people had in their home countries in Africa, and slavery actually like interrupted that, and so it was something that they had to rediscover. Like, it wasn't like a magical ability that was triggered by being enslaved, because I feel like that can sometimes be like, that's a trope that sometimes like authors or storytellers use, generally not like black creators, I feel like, and it just can feel very like uncomfortable, almost like you're justifying slavery by like saying, well, it gave you these cool magical abilities, you know. So I like that that was very much not the case in this book. So yeah, I did enjoy this, but I don't anticipate this being my favorite of Angie Thomas's books. I gave Nick Blake and the Remarkables, The Manifestor Prophecy, 3.5 stars. Next, I finished The Chalice of the Gods by Britt Riordan. This is book 6 in the Percy Jackson series that we're getting after a very long time. And I was not planning to read this like this early or at this point, but this is one of the ones that I was reading to do some like video idea planning for later on, so I read it now. I did listen to this one on audio. The narrator is Jesse Bernstein. I thought he did a great job, and I really enjoyed this. Like, this actually might be one of my favorite Percy Jackson books, which is really exciting and cool because I feel like it can be hard to like continue an older series like that after, you know, so many years, but this was great. So we're following Percy as the main character again, and he basically has to get letters of recommendation from some of the Greek gods, and I think that that premise is like so funny, and I feel like the book really delivered on that. There's a lot of that humor, a lot of that like relatability, but there's also a lot of heart. I really loved seeing these characters again. I love how they feel like genuinely older and a little bit wiser, but they're still the same characters that we know and love from the other books. I also am very impressed that I'm still invested in the main like romantic relationship, because you guys know that after like the characters admit they like each other, I tend to lose interest, but here I still loved it. I love how like supportive they are of each other. It just makes me really happy. I like the family elements and the friendships. I really enjoyed the themes and the way this book is kind of exploring like what makes a good life, and it talks about like immortality some more. Like, it just, I really enjoyed sort of the like thematic underpinnings of the story, but also it was just a really fun and interesting adventure. And like I said, I genuinely think this is probably in my top 2 of the series. I really enjoyed this. I will say there was one plot element that I knew was coming, and it's a thing that I personally dislike, so I didn't like take points off for it because I recognize it as a very personal thing, but I found it very annoying. I could have done without it, but it's fine. But yeah, overall I really enjoyed this. I gave The Chalice of the Gods 4 stars. Next, I finished Chaos and Flame by Tessa Gratton and Justina Ireland. This is the first book in a new series. I think it's just going to be a duology maybe, and Bethany from Beautifully Buggish Bethany very kindly passed her arc on to me, so this is an advanced copy that I read. I have read one book by Justina Ireland before that I absolutely loved, and I was very interested to see how these two authors would co-write something, and this was also a buddy read with my friend Huck from Badger Reads, so it was a lot of fun discussing it with her. So this is a dual point of view story. I'm pretty sure each author wrote one of the points of view, and it is set in a fantasy world where there has been this ongoing war between these different houses or families, and our female lead is Darling, and she lost her whole family to this war, and she's grown up as one of the kind of rebellious like houses who are refusing to submit to the sort of like upper house, I guess, like the one who kind of took over. And then our other main character is named Talon, and he is known as the War Prince. So he is in that conquering house, and he is like kind of the commander. And Darling ends up being captured during a battle, and Talon's older brother is actually like the crown prince or the ruler, and he decides that he's going to kind of give her this new position in the court. I don't want to get into details because obviously that's a spoiler. But yeah, he decides to sort of like bring her in, and Talon is not a fan of that at first, but the two of them do end up getting a lot closer, getting to know each other, and this was a really interesting one. Like, I did enjoy it, but I think there were things that could have made me love it even more. Like, you guys know I'm a hate to love romance fan. Like, I really enjoy that trope when it's done well, and I did really like some of the scenes between Talon and Darling. Like, there were some really well written moments between them, but I think that the relationship had to be even slower burn for me to like really get invested and to find it believable, because like I think it makes sense that these two main characters would be more open to this relationship than other people in the book, because we know from pretty early on that neither of them are really like passionate about this war, about this fight, but with everything they know about the other person and like the backstory and like the things that they each have done that have hurt the other person and people they care about. I find it a little unbelievable that it happened so quickly, and also there was a little, like, the attraction thing just happened a little too early to, again, for me to find believable. I did find Talon and Darling to be interesting main characters, and I really liked Talon's older brother, who is like the prince character, and it's so interesting because, like, as you're reading the book, you're trying to figure out, like, how much of what he's doing is like part of the plan all along. And I also realized I completely forgot to mention a big part of the book, which is the magical element is these things called boons, which are relatively rare now, but some of the people in this world have something called a boon, and that is like a certain magical ability. And so Talon's older brother Caspian, he has a boon that kind of involves like having visions, and the visions that he has have been of Darling. Like, for years now he's been like having these like visions of her and putting those in paintings, and one of the things that Huck and I talked about really liking with this book is that the male lead is not the character who has been having these visions of the female character. Like, I just thought that was very interesting and cool, and kind of refreshing, and one of the things that I liked throughout this book is that I think the authors, there were a lot of different times where they could have made a choice that would feel very kind of standard, and instead they did things in a much more interesting way, in my opinion. Like, especially related to the war. I thought that was super interesting, some of the choices they made that I think made for a more compelling story. And I've said before that I don't think being unique is like that big of a deal for a book. Like, honestly, like, we all seek out books that have elements that we know we enjoy. Like, that's how we find new stories to read. So a book doesn't have to feel like no one's ever done it before for me to enjoy it. But I do think for this story specifically, it was cool to see some of those plot decisions just handled very differently. So I liked a lot of things about this, but as I said, the romance was something that, like, the tropes, kind of looking at it on paper, I should have loved and I really wanted to love, and I just don't think it was as slow burn or as well developed as I would have liked. And also there were things about like the magic or the world building that I feel like were a little confusing. So I think that also kind of kept me from like fully engaging with the story, but like I did enjoy this. It was interesting. I think I'm at like a 3.5 stars for Chaos on Flame. Next, I finished Amari and the Great Game by B.B. Elston. This is the second book in the Amari and the Night Brothers, or the Night Brothers series. I can't say too much about it because there's a lot of things that happen in the first book, obviously, but our main character Amari is she ended up joining this sort of like secret society because her brother was involved with them and he goes missing. And so in the second book, there is obviously a lot of fallout from that. And we have the Great Game, which is like a competition that has very high stakes for Amari. And we also have some continuing like conflict between her and some of the other characters that we meet in the first book, as well as some friendships. And I liked this, but I didn't enjoy it as much as the first book. I still really like Amari as a main character. I really liked some of the friendship elements in this book. And I feel like the antagonist, like the main antagonist of this book, I think is a really, really interesting character. And even though I don't love everything that was done with them, in terms of like the series as a whole, I do think there were some really, really effective, really emotional scenes. And I think that this character is written really well in ways that I don't know, I'm not always convinced. I'm being super vague, obviously, but yeah, I feel like the way that this character is written is very compelling and interesting without trying to excuse some of the things that they've done, which I just think is really interesting. I really like that. But I didn't really care for the plot. Like the whole Great Game thing, I just wasn't super invested in. Like, I mean, I was invested because it had these high stakes for Amari, but I wasn't really invested in like what the kind of trials were. Like, I didn't really care about that. And I also found some of the plotting around those, just like the plot in general, to be very frustrating. And especially I felt like that about the ending. There was just a lot of things about it that felt really contrived to me, and it felt like manufactured conflict. Like, there were a series of things that like happened in a way that just was very annoying to me personally. Like, it just felt like things were forced to happen a certain way because, again, there was this certain conflict we had to have. So I didn't really care for that. So I don't know, this one was kind of like middling for me. Again, there were things I liked, but I didn't enjoy it as much as the first book, and I gave Amari and the Great Game 3 stars. I do want to mention that this one is another one I listened to on audio. The narrator was Imani Parks. I thought she did a fantastic job, so I would recommend that if that's an option for you. Yeah. liked but not loved. Next, I read Witchlings by Claribel A. Ortega. This was our group book for middle grade magic, and this was the first time we've done a group book. I will link that live show down below. Thank you so much to Yara, Yvette, Kelly, and Kier for hosting with me. It was a wonderful experience with you all, and yeah, this was our group book, and I'm so glad that we ended up picking this as our group book, because I don't know when I would have gotten to it, but I really, really enjoyed it. I really liked this author's previous novel, Ghost Squad. I enjoyed it, but I didn't completely love it, and I wasn't in a hurry to pick up Witchlings because the overall premise isn't something that super appealed to me. We're following our main character, Seven. She's getting ready for this basically like witch sorting ceremony, where her and all the other magical kids her age are going to be sorted into different covens, and she really, really wants to be in this one specific coven, so that's like her ideal outcome, but she at least doesn't want to end up as one of the spares, who are the kids that don't fit into any coven, and so they're basically like the leftovers, who are treated really horribly and who also very rarely get to even like keep their magic. And of course, that is what happens to Seven. She ends up being one of the spares along with two other girls, Valley and Thorn, and Seven really doesn't want to lose her magical abilities, and so she invokes this like kind of trial, like this right that the spares have to complete an impossible task. I think that's even what it's called, is like the impossible task, and if they do somehow succeed, then you know they win the ability to actually keep their magic, but if they don't, they're basically gonna die. Like they don't really know what's going to happen to them, but the last spares who tried this ended up as toads who died very quickly and were put in a museum. So again, very high stakes for these kids, and it's made even more difficult by the fact that the three of them don't really get along. Specifically, Valley and Seven don't get along. Seven has had like several very, very unpleasant interactions with Valley. She kind of like pushes her around or bullies her, and now they're forced to work together. And I just enjoyed this so much. I loved the friendship between these three girls. I loved them all individually as characters, and I also loved their growing bond with each other and the way that they look out for each other. I really liked the world of this book. It's very like whimsical, and it is sort of set in our real world, but there's only kind of tiny glimpses of that real world, so it really ends up feeling like almost like a magical realism or a fabulism story. I also loved the themes of this book so much, like the themes and the character arcs, you know, of these girls like growing to depend on each other, like the ideas of family and like family that you choose. Like if you're a fan of the found family trope, I feel like this one did that very well. It's a really great friendship that the three girls end up developing. And I also just think the themes in general about standing up for people, standing up for what is right, and bravery and, you know, helping others, like it just was really beautifully done. And I really love that Seven is forced to confront throughout the book that she did not notice really or care that much about how spares were treated until she's one of them. And she starts noticing a lot more the really horrible conditions that they live in. And she calls herself on that, you know, like she recognizes that she should have been bothered before it affected her personally. And I feel like the way that was done was really good. I love the way that this book touches on these different issues that these characters are going through and handling them appropriately for kids. Like one of the things that this book does is it kind of explores the idea of like, okay, a friend tells you a secret that they say don't tell anybody else, but it ends up being a secret, the kind of secret that you need to tell adults about. And I feel like the way this book handled that was so good. I also feel like the balance of tone here was really good. I've complained about other kind of whimsical middle grade fantasy like the Nevermore books that I think really don't do a good job, in my opinion, of balancing the like whimsy and the fun and the lightness and like the fluffiness almost with these like darker underlying elements. And I feel like Witchlings did it really, really well. Like I don't think the humor and the heart, while those were really great, I don't think they like cheapened the darker parts. And I also don't think that the darker parts made the lighter stuff feel like unpleasant or awkward. Like I just think all of it was done really well. The only reason this didn't get a full 5 stars for me is that there are some things with the plot near the end of the book that I think kind of undercut some of the things that I really loved about the novel. So I ended up giving it a 4.5 stars, but I really, really enjoyed this. I'm actively excited to continue the series, which again is not something I really expected because the premise of this one didn't interest me as much. as I know it did a lot of other people, so I'm so glad that I actually did read this. And I also want to mention that the narrator I listened to was Serena Fiallo, and she was fantastic. She also just has like an incredibly beautiful and soothing and lovely voice, but her performance was also amazing. Like, I think she did a great job of handling the emotional parts and also handling the humor. Yeah, there were like several moments in this book that were just so emotional in a way that felt very earned. So anyway, this was great. Next, I finished two beautiful picture books that I loved, obviously. I have Nell Plants a Tree by Anne Winter and Daniel Miyares. This, here, let me show you the illustration. Like the illustration style, I mean. It is just such a beautiful, warm, loving book about the ways that we can do beautiful things in the world that take care of us and also those who come after us. I think the portrayal of family here, like intergenerational family in particular, was beautiful, and I really, really love this one. I don't remember how I heard about this picture book, but I'm really glad I came across it. Yeah, I gave Nell Plants a Tree 5 stars. I feel like I'm not saying a lot about it, but it's really, really beautiful. If you're somebody who already enjoys picture books, I would definitely recommend it. But if you're also someone who, maybe you're an adult who hasn't read a picture book in a long time, I feel like this could be a good one to start with. And then the other one I have is Eyes That Speak to the Stars by Joanna Ha, illustrated by Dong Ha. And this is sort of a companion to Eyes That Kiss in the Corners, which I loved when I read that earlier this year, I think. It's about a young boy who is really hurt when a classmate of his draws a picture that includes him. And so he's really hurt by that, and he ends up being kind of like comforted or like cared for by family members. And similarly to the first book, it's about like the beauty in his face and in his eyes and in the ways that those things connect him to other family members. So yeah, I thought this was beautiful. Again, the art is also just gorgeous. I think this was fantastic. I loved it just as much as the first one, and I gave Eyes That Speak to the Stars 5 stars. Next, I finally read Ace of Spades by Farida Abika Iyamide. This book really was a huge hit when it came out last year or the year before that even. It is a contemporary thriller. We follow these two black teenagers, Chiyamaka and Devon, who are the only black students at this incredibly wealthy, very elite like private school, and they start getting targeted by this mysterious anonymous person who goes by Aces, and they are spilling their secrets in ways that are really, really dangerous to them, and things keep escalating and getting worse. And so it's about the two of them who didn't know each other or interact at all before this, having to kind of like join forces to take this person down, to figure out who this is, why they're doing this, and how they can protect themselves. So yeah, I'm really glad that Black Aweenathon finally got me to read this book, because I thought this was fantastic. I feel like this is one of those stories that is really, really compelling in its own right. Like, as a thriller or a mystery, I found this really gripping and really hard to put down, but also I think what it says is very interesting. Like, I feel like the themes, the way that this book looks at racism and privilege and class is just so smart and so well integrated with that mystery. I thought that Devon and Chiyamaka were super interesting characters, especially Chiyamaka. I really liked her. I love how unapologetically ambitious she is. Like, I thought that was really cool. So even when she is doing things that are perhaps less than okay, and even though she is like self-described as not a nice person, I feel like there was this underlying admiration for her. And also, she's obviously not doing the kinds of things that other characters are doing in this book. So, you know, sometimes it's a question of degrees, but I just really like that the story allowed her to be so ambitious and so smart and clever. Yeah, I really enjoyed her as a character. I also did enjoy Devon, although I found some of the characters in his half of the book, like his POV sections, to be like less engaging or like more frustrating sometimes. But I really enjoyed him as well. This book also has queer rep, and that is like a very important part of the story as well. One of the things that I loved most about this book is that I found the scope of the story and the mystery to be completely convincing to me. Sometimes I think in stories that try to do that, it can feel a little bit like out of proportion to the rest of the storytelling, if that makes sense. But with Ace of Spades, I didn't get that feeling. I feel like it made sense. I feel like it was set up well throughout the story while still being surprising. So yeah, I thought this was excellent. There were some like characterization things here and there that I didn't love as much, but everything else about this book just worked for me so much that I still gave Ace of Spades 5 stars. And yet another audiobook. The narrators were Jeanette Illich and Ntapiwa Mogweni, and I thought they did a great job as well. I also want to mention that one of the things I heard from people is that so the author is British, and this is set in the US, and I remember people talking about how one of the things that was kind of distracting about the writing is that there were a lot of like Britishisms that were very obvious to like US readers, and I think listening to this on audio helped me a lot with that, because normally that's something that I pick up on and I find pretty grating. Like I think a lot of people, if you notice like an accent or like a voice that you are very familiar with done in a way that isn't that great, I think that a lot of people find that distracting. But with this one, I didn't. And I think that's because the audio sort of like softened that almost. But yeah, I thought this was excellent. I'm like one of the last people to read it, but I'm glad I finally did. Next, I finished The Day Boy and the Night Girl by George MacDonald. This was one of our 2 short stories that we read for this episode of Past It Classics, this most recent episode, I should say. So we read this one and The Light Princess, which you will hear about in a future wrap-up. But yeah, I hosted this one. Taylor and Julia discussed with me, as always, and it was such a wonderful discussion. I love George MacDonald, and this story I had never read before. I had read a few other things by him, but I'd never read this one, and it's very, very short. And this is such an interesting, like, it reads kind of like a fairy tale, but also not. I don't know. So we are following these 2 main characters, the Day Boy and the Night Girl. The boy's name is Photogen and the girl's name is Nycteris. When the 2 of them were just born to different mothers, like they're not related or anything, this really horrible witch just decided, because she could, that she was going to do a little experiment with these 2 kids, and that she was going to raise one of them only in the daytime, never interacting with the dark at all, with darkness at all really, and that she was going to raise the other one only in darkness. And eventually Nycteris ends up finding her way outside, and she ends up seeing the moon. So it's during the nighttime, and she is just really struck and affected by this beauty and this sense of finding something that was missing from her, because her basic needs are all taken care of. She wasn't like unhappy or miserable, but she's always felt like something was missing. And so now getting to see the world and getting to see stars and the sky, like this really moves her, and she finds it very beautiful, and so she keeps seeking this out. And then one night while she is outside, Photogen ends up outside during the nighttime for the first time in his life, and understandably he is pretty terrified. He's like, the world is ending, where's the sun, what do I do? And he essentially has a panic attack. He's really, really struggling, and Nycteris finds him and comforts him. And even though they have a couple of misunderstandings, they end up finding a lot of comfort and care in the other person and helping them find courage. And it's such a beautiful story. I love the way that George MacDonald writes. Like, we spent so long talking about quotations in these stories because his writing style is so beautiful and emotionally evocative and descriptive without being overwhelming, but there's also these moments of just wonderful humor. There's some really biting commentary. Like, it's a really well-balanced writing style, and there's all these different layers to it, because there's like a beautiful description, but then when you look like underneath that, it's also saying something really profound about courage, and then under that it's also about like friendship, and it's so good. I love his writing. I thought the themes were beautifully explored in this book. Like I said, there was a lot about courage and bravery, and how you can like feel like you have bravery if it's untested, and it's also like a really beautiful relationship that develops between Photogen and Nycteris, and very like healthy, very well balanced. One of my favorite things about George MacDonald is I feel like in a lot of the stories that I've read from him so far, if not all of them, I feel like there is some like kind of sneaky proto-feminism going on. He definitely wasn't perfect. There are some issues in stories he's written for sure, but I feel like the portrayal of the female characters and the way that he talks about just like women in general is just really ahead of his time, and that was the case here as well. I just thought this was incredibly beautiful. There were some moments that were just very moving, very profound. Again, I love these characters and the relationship, and I feel like there is a lot of like theme and kind of metaphor in this story, but I feel like that's balanced out by these really well done characters. Like, I'm very impressed with like the short stories that I've read from him so far, that he can do so much characterization and relationship development in a relatively short span of pages, and also in a story that is somewhat in like the fairy tale kind of category, which don't tend to have a lot of that development. Yeah, I gave this 5 stars. I thought it was fantastic. And finally, the last book I finished in October is What Stays Buried by Suzanne Young. This is a spooky middle grade book, and we are following our main character Callista, or Callie. Her and her family are mediums, or they have these kind of like spirit connections, spirit powers, except that they are under a curse. They have been for a while now, where when they reach their, I think it's 13th birthday, it's like 12th or 13th birthday, they lose those powers forever. And this has just been the way it is for a long time now, and Callista is rapidly approaching this birthday, and she has the ability to see ghosts and to summon the dead and speak with the dead, and she uses this a lot of times to kind of like help people pass on and help family members who are left behind find peace. And her family have been helping the townspeople for a while with things like this, so they're like kind of accepted by the town, but not like completely. And then young kids start going missing, and it turns out that the spirit responsible is somebody who specifically has it out for Callista and her family and their whole town of Meadowmere. And it seems like she has set her sights on Callista's younger sister Molly, and so it's about Callista and her family having to work together and stopping this spirit, and stopping the spirit from continuing to like hurt kids and take kids. So I really, really liked this. This is one of those like spooky middle grade books where it is like atmospheric, and there is some like creepiness, some spookiness, but it also deals a lot with grief in a way. I just found that really, really well done in this book. Like if you've read Small Spaces by Catherine Arden, it gives me that feeling a little bit. And I think that this book is so smart in the way that it deals with grief in ways that, like, you know, everybody is really familiar with, but then it also uses like Callista and her family's abilities to kind of specifically explore different elements of grief. Like this is one of those books where the grief, the loss that Callista and her family experience is different. Like it's almost delayed because they can still interact with the ghosts of their loved ones. You know, Callie can see and talk to them, but she knows that that's not going to last forever. And I found that very poignant and very well done. I also think the like tension and the like genuine fear in this book was communicated really well, like especially around the kids going missing. You know, like that's something that happens in like quite a few stories, and I feel like this is one of the ones where the emotional impact of that was actually dealt with and explored. I also liked Callie as a main character. I really liked a friendship that she ends up forming. I thought the family elements were well done. Yeah, I really liked this. The reason I give this 4.5 stars instead of 5 is I think I wanted more from the actual mystery aspect. Like we find out pretty quickly what's going on and what this like spirit or ghosts connection is to Callie and her family, and I don't know, I think I would have liked the figuring things out part to be drawn out more, because I thought that tension was communicated so well. But overall, I really enjoyed this. As I said, I gave What Stays Buried 4.5 stars. Okay, everybody, so those were the books I read in October. As I said, I am currently reading several others of the ones that I had put on my middle grade magic TBR that I obviously didn't get to, but I'm really, really enjoying those as well. So again, quality over quantity is what I'm telling myself. But let me know if you participated in middle grade magic. Let me know a middle grade book that you've read recently that you loved. Let me know your thoughts on any of these books. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!